Hi, I'm Hugo Cassidy, partner of Pinsent Masons.
And I'm Luke McKinney, Director of Consulting at Nile.
Thanks everyone for joining the second part of the series on innovation functions and the different models that you can choose. So you'll recall that at the end of the last session, Luke went through three types of model: the speedboat, the siloed faithful, and the embedded experts. And we're going to drill into the speedboat model as an innovation function approach and bring out some of the pros and cons and how we're seeing that work in practice. Luke, is it worth just going into a bit more detail than what we covered in the first article?
Yeah, so I can jump into a little bit of context in here. So if you're in a position where you're lucky enough to be starting out in this journey, there's always kind of four aspects that we recommend folks look at when deciding on a model for innovation. So first is kind of your leadership function. So how many people within the upper echelons of your organization are familiar, proper experts within innovation, digital technology, and understand the processes of embedding that within organizations. The next is culture. Culturally, how risk averse are you, and what is your appetite within that space? Because that will determine what you things you're willing or not willing to do. The next two focus much more on capability and capacity. So capability obviously is about having the right skills available, but then capacity is, do your teams actually have the resource and remit to tackle challenges and deliver things at scale? So these will be a couple of lenses that I'll just use as we go through the speedboat model, just to give a little bit more definition. But to recap, we call it a speedboat because it's essentially a small, faster ship built separate from the mothership. So a fully capable, self-governing micro-organization where innovation takes place. This is one that allows you to essentially reset culture, bring in a lot of experts, and create kind of a cool, trendy working environment that innovating professionals tend to love. So we see a couple of kind of pros and cons with each of these models. So I'll probably just start with some of the things that we see as benefits associated with this. First and foremost, it is very good if you're just trying to get started. So if your current culture or governance is just failing to deliver innovation in any way, shape, or form, building kind of a small organization that is separate from that and has a separate remit from that is a good way to kickstart that process. This can also help kind of significantly increase your speed to market. So if you're in a particular industry where time is of the essence, and you need to be, into the market first, definitely separating that and giving its own remit and resources is a good thing to have. Other things that we kind of find where the speedboat model tends to be a little bit more superior is if the organization is struggling with collaboration across different business areas, or if teams are at capacity with their current workloads or business as usual activities. So if it takes all of your teams just to run business as usual, then suddenly you're going to have to create innovation does not happen successfully side of desk, at least not where we've seen it. And then finally, one other thing that we're kind of thinking is if your organization is actually invested in developing, and the exec team within the mothership is really on board with defending the interests of the speedboat. One of the big risks that we see is too many individuals from the core ship coming across into the speedboat, and suddenly it just becomes a microcosm of the same culture and the same challenges, just on a smaller scale. So yeah, this kind of segues me quite nicely into some of the challenges that don't work. But Hugo, before I go into that, have you seen many benefits of this kind of within the legal profession?
Yeah, so I think it's almost worth setting out what certainly doesn't work in my experience, which are sort of calls to the business to be more innovative, just encouraging people to come up with ideas and saying, listen, there's all this great stuff that seems to have potential that we should be doing, tends not to work for the reasons you've set out. The key one being that that's innovation off the side of desk manifest. So that sort of initiative, if you can call it that, would be encouraging people to whilst also executing their high-pressure day jobs in the legal industry, completely change the way they do it. And that seems like a difficult thing to do, which is why it tends not to work very well. So I have experienced flavors of the speedboat model. Now, typically, you wouldn't see it as a completely hived off business proposition with its own office, with, as you were saying, the bean bags and different self-governing or different sort of layers of governance. But you would see it where you get teams of lawyers, for example, who carve out a niche for delivering a tech-led or tech-enhanced legal service in a particular service line, and they become really expert in using technology and using the latest technology to do that. So that might be e-discovery or due diligence would be a classic one where technology has been a big factor in doing that differently for longer than I think most other technologies. So you do see, and I have seen in my career, where you get small teams who are seen as subject matter experts who operate a bit like a speedboat, and then that can then be backed up in formal recognition and team structures, objectives, incentives, and KPIs, which all align to doing that bit of innovation more and better and selling that as a proposition. And I've seen that then start to develop its own momentum, where that becomes largely capable of self-serving for solution design and development, and insulated from an expectation of having to do also what you might call business as usual legal work. So then you have your speedboat of a defined team who are not supposed to be doing BAU legal work, who specialize in a particular area and get really good at it, and have then assembled the expertise, legal and technological, to do that to the best of their ability. Now, I'd see this as where law firms would typically start their journey if there was nervousness about the proposition and they wanted to invest in an area where they knew it worked, DD, due diligence being a good example of this, or if the business identified a specific product opportunity which needed its own corporate style, if you want to put it like that. But actually, products in the legal industry or trying to create one is harder than it might seem because clients often have specific problems that need specific solutions. Products are, seen as something of a holy grail, but they are elusive to generate successfully. So it could be seen more as a specific use case development or service line operating model rather than innovation function with a broader remit. They tend to become quite specialized. And that is inherent in the speedboat model. Speedboat, smaller people, smaller group, they can't be active across the whole sphere of what a law firm is doing and all the different service lines and products that the law firm is traditionally selling. So they have to kind of focus. And there are sort of some major limitations to this model. Before we sort of move on to those, though, just to expand the metaphor here, or the imagery, if you want to take the speedboat and do it on a larger scale, which we can call the gin palace equivalent, there are well-known market examples out there established by some of the larger law firms, which have set up essentially incubation arms to start up and nurture legal tech businesses. Now, these are major organizations that run almost as a side business to the main business, and their business is bringing on these SMEs to bring out legal products for the market. There's some examples of that working really well. But I do question whether those gin palaces, bigger, at scale, larger, more self-serving, change or have the impact of changing what is happening back at the mothership in the day-to-day delivery of legal services to clients. So that's another sort of shortcoming, perhaps, that we can come to, that speedboats, small, effective, but tend to be quite directional. Gin palaces, larger, broader, maybe better at products, but are they bringing that innovation back into the mothership? But I'll hand it back to you to talk about.
I was just going to build on that. Yeah. We've definitely seen that as well. So probably in like two typical forms. So the first form is where the speedboat comes up with the early innovations. So they essentially come up with the idea, the proposition, validate it, but then pass it back to the mothership to operationalize. I'm doing air quotes for anyone listening. And then it just goes back into a very busy BAU environment where no one has any capacity to do that. So suddenly all of these great, actually we validated that there's a market for this, but there's no way to scale it within the organization. So again, that kind of transaction between the two doesn't always work out. The other one, which actually builds on your point about having the right subject matter expertise, is the other challenge, where if you have quite a broad remit as a core business, what we've seen is kind of speedboats with lots of trendy tech skills in them, but not enough people who understand like the complexity of the fundamental of like kind of the main products. So again, working primarily in regulated industries, financial services, healthcare. If you don't understand the complexity of like the products and how they make money, then suddenly these things just look cool and probably look great in a portfolio or on a website, but aren't actually solving real business problems. And that actually is one of the things that we're looking at as we start to work more with generative AI implementations, because one of the toughest things about this as a technology is without the right subject matter expertise, collaborating in the right way, it becomes very difficult to implement generative AI in a meaningful way. Otherwise, you just end up with nice, cool little use cases that probably make people go or but actually, are they going to have an impact within the organization? Probably not. So that subject matter expertise point you called out is probably one of the biggest challenges that you can have as far as having constant ready access to collaborate with those subject matter expertise to reimagine not just the technology, but the people, process, policy aspects of innovation, which organizations don't think of, but probably don't think of straight away.
Yeah, that's a massive one in the legal industry, because often, as saying earlier, the subject matter expertise and the articulation of the problems to be solved that our clients have is in the minds of the partners and other senior lawyers within the law firm. And the further away your speedboat is from those minds, the less likely indeed that they're going to be able to come up with the solutions that will actually make a difference to what clients want. So it's an effective bit of imagery from that side. I sort of have phrased it as a static network. So if you're trying to get to a place where people are genuinely doing things within the business differently, which I think is quite a good working definition of what success in innovation looks like, from a law firm's perspective anyway, genuinely doing different things or things differently rather than innovation as theatre, that requires radical knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange, cultural shift, collaboration. And I think people seeing this stuff in action, lawyers do like to see things in action before they want to then try and sell it to their clients, because there's a big trust element there. And the speedboat model, whilst it has its benefits, can support the concentration of knowledge in the minds of a few without the benefits of cross-pollination, because it is seen as other and outside of the business.
I love the phrase innovation theatre. I'll be stealing that with pride. But it's definitely prevalent, and like certain industries get into like we definitely see this a lot in kind of the pensions industry, where like kind of relationship with pension funds, where there's almost like kind of a feature arm race, like an innovation feature arm race of around, oh, well, they have that feature, we need this feature. And you start to build out these quite complex digital ecosystems that are filled with features, but they don't really deliver on any problems that members have or end clients have. And that's just like, it's kind of driven by this need for theater. And I was like, we need to have it. So like, don't get me wrong, there's a conversation to be had with like, if it comes down to everyone being equal on price and everything else, maybe those features help as a differentiation, but do they actually get used or deliver value beyond that initial transaction contracting part Well, it's one that I would love to do a project on, but no one's asked me yet.
Another sort of point, and it's connected to this, I sort of mentioned it in terms of this, I mentioned the static network and how you can actually be embedding a model that is completely contrary to what you're trying to do in terms of encouraging knowledge share and cross-pollination is perception. And I think everyone in the business has to feel that innovation is something that they can access and are encouraged to pursue. Now, that's different from encouraging everyone to come up with brilliant ideas and do things differently. I think that's a tall order, like for the reasons we discussed earlier. But they have to feel that it is for them as well. And if you have a small speedboat function and they are inherently small, again, it can generate that sense of otherness, that this is the domain of others and people can and should stay in their lanes. Speedboat people do the innovation, subject matter experts do the legal advice, and there may be some exchange, but broadly, as long as we both do our jobs well, we're covering off both sides of this coin, rather than seeing those two worlds as needing to mix in order to get the most out of them.
And that is the complicated balance that we found. So if there's too much cross-pollination between the mothership and the speedboat, the old culture of the mothership just comes across, and I think the joke that was made is you become a dinghy rather than a speedboat. And this is quite common. We've seen this in multiple occasions where actually it just becomes like a mini version of the main organization, and with all of the same policies, roadblocks, barriers, not moving any faster. The other side is if there's no cross-pollination, then you can't live on a speedboat. You kind of need something moving back and forth. Where we find organizations that kind of got that balance right, first and foremost, with most things, it starts with leadership. So one, the leadership understands the value of the speedboat, is behind it, and kind of backs it. The second is essentially about how people are recruited in and back from the speedboat. So that is both in how they're screened. So you almost do like a mini, even if it's a secondment, you do like a mini recruitment kind of process to just kind of check, like, culturally, are you going to be able to thrive and engage with this? And then also, setting a little bit of kind of more parameters around that. So it doesn't mean saying no to some people who might want to come across, but actually either from a skills, culture, capability perspective, it might not be in the best interest of the organization at whole. It's definitely a fine balance, and it doesn't take much of that. I think some of the most successful ones we've seen, there's normally been like a leader who has just been out kind of advocating within the mothership. And they are the filter. The amount of conversations and arguments that those individuals need to have within an organization to kind of protect the culture of the speedboat is really impressive. But if you don't have that strong figurehead, it become very, very tough to kind of wrangle other excos.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of other areas here, and actually, just it's connected to what you were saying there about having to maintaining that sense of defined purpose without them being subsumed within the wider sort of corporate direction or corporate objectives. Is the counter to that is that you then can have a lack of institutional governance or institutionalizing of knowledge, which then can create issues around resource allocation and scalability. And it comes down to that concentration again. If you've got your SMEs when it comes to innovation and doing things differently in a particular place, let's call it the speedboat, it may be difficult to grow that proposition because that can require, like Luke, as you were saying, a lot of wrangling at the managerial level for budget and support and so on. But it may also create the sense that, well, it may create a sense that knowledge gets stuck in that speedboat. And again, when you're trying to create change that permeates the business, that then becomes a problem. So that kind of institutional governance, institutionalizing of knowledge is definitely or can be a problem with the speedboat model, which is why I always see it as a starter for 10. Let's see how it goes. And if we can show it works, then how do we move to the next step? Because a big one for the legal industry is the difference between products and solutions. Now, that may sound like it's a matter of interest only to someone who's trying to label internally what it is that they get up to, but it's actually really important for clients as well. I think the things that clients are most impressed by is when they get a solution. So they engage with us with a problem. It may be a large-scale due diligence exercise or a remediation exercise or a mass claims exercise. And we sit down with them and design an end-to-end process to get and to meet their objectives, where it's tech-led or tech-enhanced, such that if you took the tech away, it simply wouldn't work, right? It's not window dressing. This is fundamental to the delivery of the project. Now, that's technology as a solution. And that's where it really makes the difference in what I do versus technology as a product, where you're trying to create, let's say, a transaction management platform. There's a few out there that change an aspect of a transaction. They do it across that sort of work type for that kind of project, that kind of transaction. But it's not tailored as such to a particular problem statement. Now, I think speedboats might be quite good at a particular product, developing a product, difficult to do, but could do. Or they might be good at one type of solution. But I don't think that the speedboat model, from what I've seen, is an effective method of institutionalizing an innovation culture or an access to innovation within the business that allows that solution mindset to be used when planning out how to execute large, complex, or even relatively small legal projects that need to be solved. Yeah. So again, when looking at your models, what is it you're trying to achieve? Is it day-to-day difference in the way you approach the design of something, or is it we're trying to come up with an off-the-shelf market solution that lots of people can buy?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, and to kind of use your analogy of kind of solutions. So embedding solutions into kind of big enterprise level change. A speedboat will help you kickstart that process, but is not the most sustainable means to continue it. Comparatively, say you're building a product, a digital thing that exists and has its own, profit and loss, and is like a kind of self-sustaining, ongoing, never-ending solution, for want of a better phrase. That's where the speedboat has longevity. So essentially, it's just a separate, separate solution that does its own thing. What is quite interesting is where you start to see speedboats, self-sustaining speedboats within large enterprises. Now, there's not many organizations that do this, but we have seen examples of multiple teams doing versions of the same thing, but because they all have their own separate P&L, no one's going, oh, we need one version of this. If the individual instance of a solution is profitable, we're not going to stop it. But also, if it's not profitable, we expect those teams to kill it and take it out of their P&L, so they kind of retire that solution. This is very counterintuitive to a lot of regulated enterprise and companies that we work with, where there's something around, oh, we need to consolidate this into one solution and we just need one version of this, and then which is great. It's great from like an efficiency play, and you will spend less money. Whether or not it's going to be as efficient when deployed in all of the business areas that you need it to be deployed in is a different question that I don't think is as easily answered or evidenced.
I think that brings me to the end of what I was going to say about the speedboat model, Luke. I mean, it's definitely got its benefits. It's a great way of starting and experimenting in this field, provided you can find people to man the speedboat and to you have the, if you like, the corporate heft or the ability to navigate the corporate system to maintain its distinct identity. But it has issues of scalability, and it has the other issues that we've been discussing. Mm-hmm. So, Luke, any final remarks? Otherwise, we can wrap it up and we can maybe introduce the next session, what we'll cover next time.
Yeah, I would echo what you said. I think the key thing for me is, if you, like, speedboats are unbeatable if you need to get going. Like if you just need to get moving or are kind of frozen by the current culture, it's just a good way to get things set up and running, both in the product and solution space. Once you get going, you can then start to make those decisions around what model might be more suitable, which we'll cover in our next conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luke, and thanks everyone for joining and reading this far. And very much looking forward to talking about the siloed faithful in the next installment of the series. Thank you.